And now I would like to invite two speakers. Naomi Appleby is a Yawuru and Karajarri woman residing in Buru and is the manager of the Yawuru Language Center and Nyamba Buru Yawuru in Buru. Her journey in Yawuru's repatriation project extends from personal connection as a fourth-generation descendant of an eyewitness survivor of violent first contact encounters to a project ambassador working under the guidance of the Yawuru community to assist in the repatriation process. She was the recipient of the National Museum of Australia Encounters Fellowship to further investigate the scale of international trade in human remains. And our second speaker on this panel, Sarah Yu, is an anthropologist, curator, and heritage consultant who focuses on relationship between people and their connection to country. Currently based in Buru, but today speaking to us from Perth, she works for Nyamba Buru Yawuru, the business arm of the Yawuru Native Title Group. Collaborating with Indigenous artists and writers, she has curated many award-winning projects. She has completed her doctorate in anthropology at Heidelberg University and is a research affiliate with the Australian National University, the University of Notre Dame in Buru, and the West Australian Museum. Thank you so much to both of you for joining us. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Ngadi Gurjan, Ngayi Nilawal Naomi Appleby. Thank you for the invitation to be a part of this really important presentation and conversation. I'll let Annie Sarah introduce herself as well. We are presenting the Yawuru repatriation journey, which is titled Wangadjali Burgun, and in Yawuru language, in my language, it means we are coming home. It's a very emotional and eye-opening, I won't say project, I'll say journey experience for the Yawuru community, which it's been a part of our vision to give the stories and the voices back to our ancestors through provenance research and through the journey that we're about to share. But before we get into it, I just wanted to acknowledge the sensitivity of this topic. In our cultural way, it's very sensitive and not allowed really to be talking about our deceased. Not allowed to look at photos, not allowed to say their name. So to be on a journey such as this in repatriation, we've had to develop new protocols because this is very new for us. And we've had to develop, I suppose, our own internal policies and the most culturally appropriate processes led by our elders as part of this journey. And I've been in the picture here for about 6 or 7 years, and I was a part of the international delegation when we went over to Europe to bring them home. I was one of the 3 young people who was privileged to support our elders. So it was them who were guiding this process. So I speak as a young person and my involvement in supporting this. But I also speak as a community member and someone who's worked closely with our community. So before we get into it, Annie Sarah, did you want to say anything?
I just would like to acknowledge our own people, the Yawuru people, the elders particularly, who we've been working with, and the Karajarri people as well, who were the main people that we've been working with to do the repatriation work that we've been doing. If it wasn't for them, guiding us, I think it would have been very difficult. I also really want to thank the people who've organised this conference and inviting us to speak. For us, I believe it's such a sensitive topic, but from the experience that I've had in talking about it and doing exhibitions and so on, it's something that people know very little about. And so it's very significant to the truth-telling of our nation, which we'll talk a bit more about it in the talk. And it's also an important part for the healing that has to occur. Also like to thank you for doing it in English, because we know no Polish. And from our point of view, a small community in northwest of Australia, we're hoping it's the start of an ongoing dialogue between us and the university around the idea of, around the need to repatriate these ancestors. Next.
So just to provide a little bit of context about where we're talking about, Yawuru country is in the northwest coast of Western Australia. It's we call ourselves saltwater people. We're on the coast, and it's known for its pearl shells. Famously, the pink tartar maxima, and that was one of the trades that fueled the pearlers, who we'll talk about very shortly, and the pastoralism industry. So, we live in a town called Buru, and one of our ancestors was taken in Roebuck Bay. And Annie Sarah and I work for Nyamba Buru Yawuru. We've got the logo just to the side, and as mentioned in the introduction, Nyamba Buru Yawuru are the corporate arm to our PBC, and the PBC is the prescribed body corporate native title holders who represent this area. So we work there in the repatriation space, so to speak.
Okay, moving on.
Oh, okay.
We haven't had a chance to coordinate this, so we're just ad lib.
I suppose what I will say was this process was led with Lian. Lian in Yawuru language is your innermost feelings. So everything that we did was done with Lian. Good Lian, bad Lian, strong Lian. It was just framed in a way that was going to protect us, protect our ancestors, and that was what guided the process to head over seas and create that safe passage for our ancestors to come home. Anything you wanted to say, Annie Sarah?
I'd just say that it was as late as 2016 that the Yawuru community were informed and discovered that the bones of their ancestors had been taken from the country, and that from their country anyway, and that they were placed in museum collections in Europe, Asia and America. And people were shocked. They just had no idea. And I'd have to say the same for myself, because I had worked as an anthropologist and historian, lived in the community, and I didn't know either. But since that time, we've now discovered over 32 ancestors, each of which have their own story. They're scattered around the world between London, England and Germany, Norway, Japan, America so far. But what was interesting was that collectively, and for us, it revealed the unfolding of the colonial encounter from the time of first settlement in our area, which was as late as 1860s, to the mid-1900s. And it has become a story that exposes the collusion between the state, the church, and the settlers, and this further violation and dehumanisation of First Nations peoples in Northwest Australia. So, as a result of that, maybe we just move on to the next one. We started up a project called Wangajali Buru, which means we are coming home. And there are 5 parts to that. We're a fairly small organisation. So the 5 parts of that project or journey, project/journey, is that we try to do our own research as best we can. We are committed to the repatriation of the ancestors. So we will try to work out how to bring the ancestors home. We are developing a memorial and resting place in Buru. We were asked to sort of share the stories. So we have developed an exhibition called Wangajali Buru, which we put on last year. And we are also hoping to make a film. And as you'll hear in the next few slides, these stories of the ancestors do follow this colonial occupation of the country. And the Klaatsch story was because he came in about somewhere between early 1900s. He was collecting ancestors from Broome and Beagle Bay Mission, but he was working very closely with the church to acquire the remains. So it was an important link in our story. But we'll start from the beginning,
Naomi. Sorry, am I moving on to the next slide?
Yeah. Next slide. Yeah.
Okay, so we first found out about this particular ancestor in 2017, and it was through the help of the Australian National University through the RRR Return, Reconcile, Renew project. However, it wasn't listed as Broome, it was Roebuck Bay. So it was lucky that Aunty Sarah picked up on that. But what's particularly interesting about this ancestor is he has a lot of provenance linked to his record, and that's quite unusual. And he's still in the Natural History Museum in London, but this ancestor links to first contact in Yawuru country. And as a result of the retaliation, the punitive expedition that occurred when the search party came looking for the 3 missing explorers, this ancestor, Guariman, was, I suppose, found guilty through the eyes of the police officers at the time. There was a bush court, a trial, and even though he couldn't speak a word of English, they found him guilty, and he was beheaded, and his skull was sent to England. A part of that process that I was a part of with Aunty Sarah and another historian was looking through the archives in the State Library, looking through the explorers' journals. So that was another process to retrace the steps, because this area was undeveloped at the time. We just had to go by what was written in their journals. Where it gets particularly interesting for myself is we linked this story back to some oral history that remains in my family. 4 generations ago, my great-great-grandmother witnessed something very similar that matched the place and the time. And this ancestor with, as you can see in the bottom right-hand corner, the information is inscribed, etched in his skull. The name, the location, the year, and what he was murdered for, or his crime, so to speak. And there's a plaque up at the Fremantle Esplanade talking about this particular occasion. So there's that was quite shocking, translating all of this to the community. And some of the emotional, or the response we got from the community was, we have to get to the bottom of the story. Let's find out what's going on. Let's try and advocate and get him back. So that began the Wangajali Burugun project. Should we go into the pillars, or did you want to add anything to this before we move on?
I think the main thing was that people knew about that early contact. They knew that the settlers had tried. 1860s was the first attempt at settlement in the Broome, in that region of Roebuck Bay and Broome. It had failed, and everybody knew there had been a lot of violence. But the shock was that his skull had been taken as a trophy, and finding it in the Natural History Museum was even more disturbing. And I have to say, even as we were taken to see him, it was just not done in a very nice way. It was very clinical. His head was in a box. They shoved us in a small room. It just was horrible, really. And yet this was this first contact that people had. And we had a name, we had a place, we knew exactly what had happened. It was just this missing part of the story, that they'd taken his skull. And yeah, so it was all extremely shocking. But that was the first story. People are still waiting to have that ancestor return, despite all the provenance that is available for him. His name, the place, the historical records, we are still waiting. And it's, when did we go there? It's about 5 years now, at least. So patience is required. Yeah.
And then shortly, not too long after we, I suppose, activated this project, somebody within the Grassy Museum who was a friend of a friend, a connection to Aunty Sarah, reached out to advise that they had ancestral remains that belonged to Roebuck Bay, the divers of Roebuck Bay. So I think we were advised that there were about 7 ancestors at the very beginning. Now, we weren't too sure what to expect out of this process, because there was a bit of urgency placed on the repatriation itself due to, I think there was a change of government at the time. We had to fly over there really quite urgently, and the the government was going to pay for one representative, but given the sensitivity of this process, it was decided, well, we can't just send one person. We have to send we have to send a group of people, and we don't know exactly if they're just Yawuru. It's really quite close to Karajarri people as well. So a Karajarri representative came with us. I think there was about 7 people in total. It really was about the process rather than the cost of flying all of us together. And what happened, we quickly made our way over to Germany straight after London, actually, when we went to visit Guariman, and we were unsuccessful in securing Guariman's return. So we went to Berlin, and we were escorted by the curators at the Leipzig Museum. So we retraced the movements of our ancestors. We went to the Dresden Palace. Sorry, it's called the Leipzig Palace in Dresden. where we were shown our ancestors, where they were put on display. And that was really quite an emotional experience for the entire group. For me, that's where the penny dropped, because I didn't quite understand why they were taken. I just kept asking why this was happening. And that's when I learnt about this this theory of eugenics and evolution and the science behind and the black market that went on back then. And from there, we learnt that the 1942 bombing that happened in Dresden, the ancestors were taken down and shifted off to Leipzig. So we went to Leipzig, and that's when we actually greeted, or we saw them. And it was there that we learnt through the coronial report that there were more than 7. There were about 14 individuals, men and women, who were victims of blackbirding. And blackbirding is a term in relation to this pearling era through kidnapping and forced labour for our ancestors who suffered many injuries through the times. We learnt that there were children involved. They were so young that you could not, you didn't know what sex that they were. It was just that, and they all suffered injuries through, remind me of the injuries, Auntie Sarah, the ear.
The damage to the eardrums, the bashing on the head, which we had read in the records of incidents of abuse, but here it was in the bones. The evidence was in the bones, and also the age, the fact that women were involved. In 1871, they were supposed to have banned the use of women as divers. So the fact that women were part of the group, and also that prominent pearlers had prominent. Yep.
Sarah, I'm so sorry I'm jumping in like that. Could you? I've got the message from the room that you are very quiet. They can't hear you very well. Is there any way you could sit closer to a microphone, perhaps, or speak a bit louder? That would be fantastic.
Sorry.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Both
Sorry,
of us?
and we better.
Naomi, perfectly loud. Good.
Oh, okay.
Sarah, just.
Okay. Anyway, they didn't know. The bones and the ancestors showed that this history of abuse of native divers had occurred, and and this is around the 1880s. So that was when Broome first started, and prominent pearlers from Broome, whose families are still in Broome, were the ones who had sold the remains to the museum. So I think the whole thing was a shock, but it was the time of first settlement of the Broome area. So, Naomi?
Yeah. Sorry, I realised that we're probably getting a little bit short of time because, but we'll move on. Actually, Auntie Sarah, you might talk better to this section.
Right, okay.
I think you did a bit more research around this one.
So while we were waiting, we did an exhibition, and when we were doing that, in the middle of it, I received this article from Corina about Klaatsch, Hermann Klaatsch, and this is when we first heard about him. I think that she will talk about it later, but it involved Father Nicholas Emo, and Nicholas Emo is revered in Broome by the Catholic Church because he was the founder, basically, of the church in Broome. And we have a Nicholas Emo Centre. He's been applauded for his humanitarian work. So I have to say it was a real shock to find that MultiMemo in particular, but also other German priests were involved in the collection and the dehumanization of the ancestors, and complicit in hiding the fact that they were giving these remains to a German scientist. Klaatsch obviously had a good relationship with these priests, and so he was, where he was rejected in other areas, like in some of the prisons and so on, he was successful in obtaining these remains. And again, it tells the colonial story of that time, of how people were being treated and by the pearlers and other settlers. So yes, so that was a real shock, but I think it really brought out the collusion of the state and the church in this illegal trade of remains. And, you know, so yeah, it was a bit of a shock to us. I'll just quickly move on to the next group, just to finish this sort of colonial story. The other group of ancestors that we found and have located, and some have been returned. More people have been, their remains have been found in and around Broome, and then they were sent to museums around Australia. And it's a reflection of what was happening at the time. There was an apartheid-like act that was called the 1905 Aborigines Act, which saw all the people, Aboriginal people, or anybody who was classed as a native, you weren't allowed in the town. So these remains have been found around the edges of town from reserves and so on. So their story is about this whole period from the post-1905, but well into the 1920s and 30s, of an excluded population who lived on the outside of Broome. So together, these stories of these 32 ancestors just follows this the colonial story of the settlement of Broome. Okay, so people wanted to share this story. That was the instruction that we got from our cultural law bosses, and so we started to develop the idea of an exhibition. Naomi, maybe this one.
So yes, as Annie Sarah has mentioned, we've developed this exhibition, and it's not like a exhibition with objects. It was purely digital and through storytelling. And as I mentioned before, we used our lian, our feelings, to really guide how we were going to tell the story very sensitively, in a way that's not going to, there's a lot of shocking details, particularly we've got a very strong Catholic influence and presence here in Broome, but and the male family, who are the famous pearling family, we didn't want to create any kind of tension or generate any sort of hatred. We wanted to do this in a way that, yes, we have to acknowledge the past, and we have to tell it in a way that's going to just promote a message of healing. And this is the way that the community wanted it told, telling the story of the ancestors, but through the response of the community. This is what we felt when we found out. This is how we would like the audience to accept this information and come on this journey of healing with us, walk side by side with us. That's really the kind of take-home message, and something that we are trying to get out there as this way of truth-telling, as Paul mentioned before. It's a way to create some sort of reconciliation, to get the truth out there, because it has to be told. So this was a display that was put up. Really, it's to create that, rehumanization. We wanted to tell it through our eyes. There is the scientific background, but we're not talking about that. The exhibition talks about what, we introduce the ancestors we talk about the hard times that they lived through. We do talk about, the explorers and the anthropologists who came, and we talk about the museums, but it's mainly through the eyes of Yawuru and Karajarri people.
Okay, so we've jumped around a bit. This is
Sorry.
part of the story was also about the actual experience that we had with the Grassy Museum. And given that the university is about to kind of work on the idea of, or hopefully engage in repatriation, it's probably worthwhile just referring back to that. They were amazing, and what they've done within their museum has been to create a total space within the museum that is dedicated to repatriation. And it's not just an exhibition space, it's also a working space, it's a community space, and all those activities are actually part of now the museum and its display. In that photo, you can just see a photo of the this new section that they've made. Next, Naomi. So we just wanted to say that really the whole experience was done with respect. We followed the cultural protocols. It's created an enduring partnership with the museum. It was informative. If they hadn't have done that investigative work about the remains, the forensic study that they did, we probably wouldn't have known that they were pearl shell divers. It was through that investigations that we were, and it was non-invasive investigations. It was a very successful repatriation, but as a community, we funded our own delegation to go. We worked in parallel with the Australian government. The Australian government had their own delegation, of which one member was a Yawuru person, but we sent our own cultural delegation as well, and it was a great exercise in truth telling about what had happened to those particular divers. It still is very emotional to talk about, really, when you think about who these people were. Maybe to the next one, Naomi. So they weren't just objects. With Birgit Sheps at the Grassy Museum, we were able to kind of give them names and identities. They went as far as to do some facial reconstruction so that they actually had a face. That was a tricky one because people didn't want necessarily to have photos, if you like, of people, but they felt that it was so important to kind of give them a face so that they had an identity, that they weren't just bones and objects, they were actually people. And then, and then they helped us to follow through the story. Next, Naomi. It's just because we're running out of time. They just had, and the embassy was fantastic. In this instance, we felt, I understand the anger of that other man earlier, that we shouldn't be here doing it, but I think the delegation was, and Naomi can say something, that just incredible gratitude for the way that it had been treated, and they used the whole exercise as a way of building a relationship. So I think it was a very powerful experience.
Yeah, it was definitely, they were very sincere to our cause, and they allowed us to do things our way, which was really important, by way of creating that safe passage for our ancestors and bringing that cultural smoke, to let them know that we were there to talk to them. And the government worked with us so we could, bring them home and let them know that we were right there. So that was really important in the process.
And quickly.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think I skipped ahead on myself here, but yes, the cultural protocols that we had to, I suppose, create ahead before the repatriation journey happened, and it was through the support of the German people and Grassy Museum and our Australian government as well. So when we landed in Sydney, we had the traditional owners from Sydney welcome us there because we explained that we were bringing our ancestors onto their country. And then same at Perth Airport, we had the traditional owners, the Noongar people, welcome us into their country, and a performance was done there. And they're still there in storage. So at least we know that they're safe for now until we develop our resting place.
Okay. I think we're going to have to just skip through this talk about the exhibition. Maybe just hold it there for a minute.
Oh, here?
That other one, yeah. So Naomi said we didn't want to call it an exhibition, so we didn't really, but it was a journey, and we kind of curated it in such a way that people had to follow this journey of discovery, of finding out about the ancestors, of then finding out what happened to them, and then finding out about what happened to their remains when they were taken overseas and put in boxes and put on display and so on. And then the last part of the journey was around the resolution of, well, what are we going to do and how are we going to deal with it? How do we heal from this experience? And and how do we also bring them back? So, so the experience follows that journey, but key to it was this reflective space, which you can see in the top corner, right hand corner, and it was designed as a traveling exhibition. It's very kind of low key and not flash, but we created this central space with projections, and Naomi might just want to talk about that. We wanted to create dialogue between the audience and the people and their experiences. And we also wanted to, the two main goals were to create a dialogue, but also to give voice to the ancestors. So
yeah, no, that's perfect.
That was just about the importance of country. Anyway, I think we probably have to go to the end, I think, because we're going to run out of time.
Yeah, we're going to run out of time. Sorry, everyone.
Maybe to the memorial.
Yeah. Memorial, yeah. So this is a interpretation of the memorial resting place, which is in the Broome Cemetery. So we've been very fortunate to be supported by our local shire to have a block dedicated to this. And as you can see, there's a walkway for people to come and learn history through a bit of interpretive art pieces and understand some of the history that's gone on right here on Yawuru country. And then there's an ossuary up the back, which will be the secured storage for our ancestors. Now, traditionally, we don't we don't bury our ancestors. They would traditionally be in the trees or in the sand dunes. So burying them 6 feet under is not something that would typically be done. So the community decided a safe storage ossuary, which is protected and it's lockable. That was probably the best option in the current climate, because this is traditional people we're talking about here. So that's where we're at. This memorial resting place isn't done yet, or it actually hasn't even started. So that's high on the priority list to gather the funds to be able to build this important place. Is there anything you'd like to add, Sarah?
I think the provenance issue is important here. We know that the ancestors, the 32 ancestors that we know of, have been taken from Yawuru country, but we actually, apart from Guariman, we actually don't really know where they're from. They could be from Broome and possibly are, but they could also have been. Broome's been a centre for, traditionally it was a centre of cultural exchange, but once the pearling industry got started, people were coming in or brought in or taken in, and so out of all of the ancestors, none of them we can be 100% sure that they're Yawuru. So by placing them in an ossuary rather than burying them means that we can, if any further information ever comes to light, then we can, maybe take them back to their country or whatever. But until that time comes, it provides a culturally appropriate place where law bosses will be looking after them. It's not a public place, it'll be a private space, but they will at least be able to rest in the country where they were taken from. And that is the aim of the ossuary. And the memorial will share this story because we think it's an important story that the Australian nation is largely unaware of. And that was certainly the experience when we did the exhibition. Most people had no idea. So it clearly is an important story to tell. And I think it's, Naomi might want to finish on this. It is part of the healing journey that that our nation needs to take. So maybe you want to finish with.
Yes, there was a quote here. Oh no, sorry, my apologies. There was a anyway. Sorry, I've lost my thought. Yeah, I think that's everything. Sarah.
Yeah, I think people just need to understand that it's a highly spiritual experience and people feel culturally responsible for the ancestors. They see it as their obligation to bring them home. The funny thing about this story, our story in particular, is that people often said, you know what, Sarah, we're not bringing them home. They're finding their way. And the way the story of this colonial settlement of Australia unfolded absolutely reflected that, just the way they appeared in our own histories of telling the history of Broome and Yawuru people. It just, we did feel that it was them telling us what happened, not us telling them. Yeah, it was very powerful. Thank you.